All right, you're watching a very special coverage and continuance of the commemoration of the Gen Z protests that took place 2 years ago. This is the Situation Room on KTN, as well as on SpiceFM this morning. Dennis Aseto Ndroko and Joe Kamanya with you today as we look into some of these matters. So thank you for keeping it here, KTN, as we look into this. Of course, we saw earlier what the roads are looking like, and that there seems to be some anxiety in the air, and that there are very many roadblocks in different parts of the city because of the fact that there is, security checks. We see some coming out of Roysambu. We see some also coming off of around the Mlolongo area and touching on Mombasa Road. There are some also right around Kibra, and then trying to get into the city. There is a spot check for most of the situation this morning. Many of those vehicles are being allowed to come through. We don't know what it's going to look like later in the morning, but we're going to be following up. And at some point through this, we will be talking with different KTN reporters who are in different parts of the city to get a bit of an update from them in terms of what's happening. So thank you for being here this morning as we do. At this point, we're going to get into a conversation around the Gen Z commemoration and the protection of human rights. The brand new executive director of Amnesty International is George Morara, and he's here with us this morning. George, good morning.
Very well, thank you so much. Good morning to you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here today. And even as we get into some of these conversations and try to figure out for another go what the protection of human rights actually does mean, Dennis goes around the African country, the African continent, which you may know, comes back with a different proverb every day from a different country. He'd love to share that with you, and we'd love to get your interpretation of it.
The country we're in today is a very interesting country. You know why? On the first day, God said, "Let there be
light." And
there was light.
Absolutely.
And on the 8th day, God said, "Let there be Kenya." And there was Kenya. Yeah? And Kenya has a lot of many eights because there's also the eighth wonder. So you talk about the wild beast migration. Kenya loves eights, as well as the fact that, again, the election will take place on the 8th month. Kenya loves eights. You just gotta love it. But it's a beautiful country because look at its people and resilience. The constitution, the highest law in the land. Kenyans follow it, but you have a bunch who think they are above the law. But that notwithstanding, the judiciary as well has continued to show that finally there is something that can be done. We saw recently what happened with the cabinet secretary for health. But let's go to the proverb. It comes from the Luo community. I'll say it in Luo, then translate it in English. Jatelo okngal, that is in Luo. But in English, a leader does not chew bones. How would you interpret it? What do you think the Luos are saying?
In most cases, we associate bones with toughness. There are those ones who think that the bones are the sweet part of it, the bone marrow. I know from the community I come from, which and your neighbors, if you wanted to keep the young people busy, when you're serving meat, you give them the bony part. So they continue gnawing at it as they are having the juicy parts of it. So, well, a leader for me would always settle for the juicy parts of the bargain. And yeah, that's my interpretation, that a leader, an elder, doesn't really stick with the bones. So he's always, he's been here long enough to know when you're throwing him a bone and the parts of the meat that is called minovu, the softer parts. So, yeah.
Speaks a lot about Kenya, man.
Indeed.
Good interpretation. You can take a million and fly all over the place every day, but it's okay.
Absolutely,
yes.
Yeah, well. But what would you say the interpretation is in Luo?
The interpretation is in Luo, Ajatelo Ngal pretty much talks about a leader leading with humility. Yes.
Yeah. Where's the bone and the humility and the meat?
Bone and humility. When you look at different communities, the juiciest part comes from
inside the bone.
From inside the bone. So what a leader then gets to do is do the hard work, slaughter, skin, everything, minofu. But then again, the juiciest part is what you give to the people that you lead.
Well, I can live with that.
Well, sure. Indeed, let's. This amorphous thing called human rights,
Yeah.
Yes.
it seems to be amorphous for a lot of people, because we talk about things like, well, my rights end where yours begin, mine begin where yours end. But one thing that Kenyans have been guaranteed under the Constitution, whether it's practiced or not, is that there will be the honoring of human rights. From your perspective, what exactly does that mean?
Well, human rights mean and have always meant one thing, that there are certain entitlements we enjoy by virtue of just being human. And in the case of Kenya, we have codified those entitlements in a whole chapter, chapter 4 of the Bill of Rights, that gives Kenyans certain minimum guarantees of entitlements that they should enjoy just by virtue of being human beings. Actually, I was mulling on that question while I was driving here this morning. Say, if human beings were conditioned, because we are born with those conditions, we start carrying those human rights. Before we were born into this world with those human rights. And when we're in this world, we live those human rights. So human rights, like you rightly say, though sometimes they're not practiced, they're not observed, but they don't go away. They are our inherent entitlements. And in the case of Kenya, they have been codified in Chapter 4 of the Constitution. And just in the context of what we are talking about today, in the context of memorializing the Gen Zs, I've had some leaders try to invoke some decrees that come from a position whereby they think they have the ability and the powers to take away human rights.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, human rights are those entitlements that we've given ourselves. And in this country, we've said, especially under Article 19, sub-Article 3 of the Constitution, we enjoy those rights, not because the state gives those rights to us, but we enjoy them because we're entitled to those rights. So, as an initial remark, let me just say, human rights, whether the state observes them or not, remain. And when they are violated, then we, the people, the defenders of that space, come in to ensure that they are actually restored.
But aren't they not actually activated when they are respected and observed? Is that not now when we say these rights can be activated? Because, I mean, I could have a mug, but unless I do something with it, then it's useless. We can talk about them being there, that whether you respect them or not, they don't disappear. That's understood. But look at what we're looking at now. 65 people, we're commemorating their death. Another 27 the year after, commemorating their death. We're not even counting the number of people who are missing, who went missing under the promise that these things would come to an end. So can you really say you have human rights if you are observing human rights, if you've not activated the position under which then they can actually be observed?
Of course, you're absolutely right. You can't say you have a human rights if you can't enjoy them, because then they just become a declaration of intent. But human rights should be our lived realities. And you're taking me into Human Rights 101. When you're talking about Human Rights 101, we have two sets of people. We have those ones whose duty and responsibility is to ensure that they protect human rights, they fulfill human rights, they promote human rights. Those are the duty bearers, the state officers, the police, the people in positions of power. We call those ones the duty bearers. They have a responsibility to respect human rights, a responsibility to fulfill human rights, and also a responsibility to promote human rights. And then on the other side, we have what we're calling the rights holders. The rights holders must be facilitated by the duty bearers to enjoy their rights. So you're absolutely right. In a situation whereby, like I said earlier, those ones in positions of power are not making concrete steps to ensure that there is realization of rights in terms of their fulfillment, their protection, and their promotion, then those rights just remain declaratory statements on paper. But again, back to Article 19 of our Constitution, the state officers and everybody is mandated when they're doing their development and planning to do that from a human rights perspective. And I'm saying this because we're in this era whereby we've had some leaders tell Kenyans, well, don't make noise. It's almost like we're going back to the independence days where the dictum was, hey, silence, development in progress. We know what is good for you. We're going to tell you how to behave. Well, our constitution decrees that we cannot have development outside the framework of human rights. So again, for me, when I see leaders saying focusing more on economic development, I think it should come as a total package, because economic development without constitutional development is not complete development in my sense.
Okay. Well, and as you put it clearly, Article 19 talks about our basic freedoms, our fundamental freedoms that we must have as a society, because the intention was to have a just society, social justice. And our human rights, I think sometimes we under-explain them, because they are multidimensional. You mention economic justice, you mention tax justice, developmental or development justice, that these things must happen in concurrent, not just human movement, because today we are talking about human rights in respect to people are being asked, do not protest, do not come out. But the genesis of today's commemoration was out of economic injustice, that the governed who created this constitution felt the economic policies that are being advanced in that finance bill were not user-friendly. So to an extent, one could even argue that this would have been stopped. We would not be here today talking about the loss of life, because when you talk about violation of human rights, it ends mostly with death, loss of life, loss of significant others. So in that society, we lose human beings who otherwise would have been active members of a basic unit called a family. And yet, a process of now compensation is spoken about. And you hear people saying, okay, a wrong was committed, but there is no admission of guilt. But to cover it up, we are going to compensate you because you lost your loved one. Is that right? Is that just? And when you talk about justice, because human rights, the people who are in your space, you seek justice, right? How do we define that justice? What would be just when you're trying to compensate, when you're trying to address the violation of the basic freedoms?
I think these conversations have been dominating the airwaves, especially since yesterday. And what you ask brings me to, let me just say what we've done as Amnesty in this space. Currently, we're in a collaboration with an organization called ODIPODEF. Now, ODIPODEF and Amnesty have looked at the trend of protests in this country. We have what we're calling the Kenya Freedom Index. And if you look at that Kenya Freedom Index from 2020 to 2025, we have had 1,000 protests in the country. So those ones have been documented. And these protests then, who is organizing? It is your people out there in the community. So that's the number one, organizers, the residents and communities. Number two, we have the workers and the unions who are going out there to organize. And number three, we have the youth, of course, our Gen Z and the students. They form that part of the organizing. Surprise, surprise, people always say that civil society is out there making noise, the paid activists and all these. They are number five. And then what are the issues that Kenyans are going out there to protest about? Again, according to the research and this project that Amnesty International, Kenya and ODIPODEF are doing, the three top reasons why Kenyans are going on the streets. One is economic freedom. That dominates what is driving people to the streets. Number two is political freedom. That is driving why people are going to the streets. And then number three is an emerging area we're calling the environmental freedom. So those are the three drivers of protest. And then maybe just put your question in context. When people go out there, who is the object of their protests? Who do they want to address issues of economic freedom, issues of political freedom, and again, issues of environmental freedom. The number one person or people that they're targeting is the national government. It shouldn't come as a surprise. That is the executive and the ministers, because they, like I said, they're the duty bearers.
Right.
They have a duty and responsibility to ensure that Kenyans enjoy their rights fully, and in this case, the economic freedoms, the political freedoms, they're the custodians of making sure that those rights are implemented. The number two is the county governments and local authorities. So we've seen people go out there demonstrating against the excesses of the local government and all that. And then number three, of course, is the police and security agencies, and then parliament. So again, from this evidence-based kind of analysis of the environment, we can clearly see, back to your point, that if the leaders did the right thing, if the leaders listen to the citizens, if the leaders live true to the dictum of we the people, as found in Article 1 of the Constitution, we will minimize these cases and these incidents whereby people need to go out there. But I find it surprising in this country, because once Kenyans go out there and elect their leaders, the leaders think they've become overlords. Yet at the end of the day, the people retain the sovereign power. Sovereignty belongs to the Kenyan people. They're the ones who put leaders in office. And Article 73 is very clear that when you go into, when you occupy a state office, you are there to serve people, not to rule over them. So I wish our country had a crop of leaders who really lived true to the Constitution, responded to these issues that Kenyans are raising, then we would minimize these acts of bloodshed, demonstrations and all that. And the leaders, again, back to the Luo proverb, should lead with humility. They are servants of people. Without those people, they will not, unless we are in a monarchy or a dictatorship and all this. But people woke up in the morning, believed in those leaders, gave them a little bit of their power to govern themselves so that they govern on their behalf. So humility is key, but humility doesn't actually make sense if the leaders are not listening to what the citizens are telling them.
George, if you look at where we find ourselves as Kenya today, and I ask the matter of justice vis-a-vis justice and non-repeating, if that's a word, of
non-recurrence.
Non-repentance. So here now we find ourselves where Kenyans have been killed in this country for a very long time. And I start historically. 1992 Kenyans were killed because of political issues. You come to 2002, Kenyans were killed. 2017, Kenyans were killed. You come to 2022, again, Kenyans were killed. 2024, 2025. And it is seemingly as if over time, Kenya has really not dealt with the question of justice in totality. What has happened is we've kept on just putting a rug over it and moving on. So today, even when we talk about compensation, what we're just doing again is taking this piece of cloth, putting it over it so that we can move on as we have done over time, which then asks the question, is Kenya ready? Are we finally on that pedestal where we're saying this has happened for a very long time, in one way or the other, politics is involved. We need to clean our politics, and we finally need to say never again. Not just say never again, put a rug on it and move like we've always done.
I couldn't have put it better myself. I think as a country, if you look at the statistics and all this, we may be peaceful, but it's a passive kind of peace. Underneath that kind of passive kind of peace, there's a lot of violence. And the violence is so much the point whereby we've actually lost sensitivity to human life. It's like human life doesn't really matter so much in this country. And why do I say so? Today we are commemorating the 60 or so young people that lost their lives in the Gen Z protests. But if I have to take a time series, like what you've said from the 90s and all this, I don't want to go that far. But let me just share with what we have from 2017 up to now. The statistics, and these are not just figures, these are actually Kenyans who have lost their lives. There are two main categories, and the information here has come from the National Crime Research Center. It's come from the police themselves, the National Police Service. It's come from agencies and organizations documenting this, including ACLED and all that. So the two main causes of death in the country between 2017 and 2026 have been criminal gangs, gangs like Mungiki, gangs like Wakali Wao, Wakali Kwanza, and then number two is political violence. Within that period, from 2017 to 2019, 350 Kenyans lost their lives. Between 2020 to 2022, another 400 lost their lives in gang-related violence. Between 2023 and 2026, 450 deaths were occasioned. So when you look at these figures, if you add all of them, we've lost over 1,200 Kenyans. And this has happened in what we are calling peacetime. The last time we saw these huge numbers of people was when the country was in a major crisis, the 2007-2008 post-election violence. But I think we're subjecting Kenyans to death slowly, and these numbers are adding up, they're piling up. What do they point us to? They point us to a culture whereby those ones who are supposed to be in the forefront of safeguarding the citizens of this country are not doing their work, because what makes you a state? What makes you a state is when there's gang violence and people are killing themselves, you close that monopoly of violence. The monopoly of violence should only belong to the state. So you have, and then we're seeing the very unfortunate case whereby even the politicians are now outsourcing their work to the goons and all this. But to both the questions that you asked, the latest step about trying to redress or address some of these historical deaths and all this, well, we engage with the victims, we engage with the survivors. They think it may be a small band-aid solution, but it's a first good step. It is not sufficient. There's no amount of money that, for example, can bring back Rex Masai, Kennedy, all the other young people have passed on. But having a genuine conversation whereby the government says, listen, this bloodshed has to stop. The bloodshed must stop. So it cannot be that we are counting figures upon figures.
Yes.
People die in floods, 87 people, and nothing happens. Nobody even gets shaken by that. So we've cheapened life, and I think the moment we lose the ability to believe that we matter, that our lives matter, then that's when we start dying slowly by installments.
Now, George, at a macro level, all governments are meant to protect their citizens. But globally, we have, I think, over 50 conflict areas. And you realize the prevalence of violence. I think right now, in this peace moment, because the world is not at war, but I think it is an all-time high, the number of conflict areas we are having. Unfortunately, the perpetrators of this violence are the people who have been trusted, or the entities that have been trusted by the citizenry to protect them and manage the public order, you know, and offer facilitation of the public goods through taxation, because there is no government that comes to rescue people, not even the Kenyan government. People pay taxes, they appoint people to office, either through appointment or elective. We form organizations based on the various rules we have, and we expect implementation as people serve. Now, when we see the high prevalence of violence, if this country of ours has been associated with some conflict areas like Sudan, like Congo, and it becomes just as breaking news, you know, but no action is taken. You as the peace, the people who are in the peace development space, what policy direction should we start looking at, either as a country, as a continent, or globally? Because if the trend was to continue, more damage is just bound to happen. We have seen unleashing of missiles using drones. So even as technology advances, it also poses a certain threat to peace development. So what policy direction do we start looking at locally as a country, locally as communities, locally as regions, as a continent? Because without peace, the global order is going to change. It is changing. You look at just the latest war between Iran and the US, how it has affected the global economic fiber. It still goes to the economics of the world. You hear about China and the US, still goes back to economic struggles. So what policy direction should we start looking at?
Maybe let me start off from the last point that you made, the threat to the global world order. And you're absolutely right, because if you look at the history of the world, there are certain landmarks that are illustrative and also worth drawing from. Of course, most of the African continent then was still under what we're calling spheres of influence, domination, and all that. When the First World War happened, when the Second World War happened, they were marching on towards being independent African states and all that. If you look at the world as it was, the pre-World War world, I think we're moving to that order again, where we have a great power competition. The politics was beggar thy neighbor. You hear people like the US saying America first. We don't want to create a multilateral structural institution whereby people come together and reason. So the structures of the liberal democratic world order that were created after the terrible war of 1945, that ended actually in 1945, that world order is increasingly disintegrating as we watch. For a long time, we were dominated, of course, by the East and the West. So we had the satellite states, the Soviet Union. We see they're trying to remake themselves as a big empire. And then if you believed in what they're doing, economic rights first, then you're seen as a socialist, a communist, whatever it is. And then we had the capitalist world. And that politics played here. And that's the politics that's also playing in other parts of the country here, because why is Sudan the way it is? There's an element of the big power politics that have now gone to almost that predatory era of mercantilist capitalism, where people are just going in to extract. And the order that was supposed to be there, like the global order weaved around the UN, the institutions like the UN are becoming increasingly tarnished, even when they're doing very great work. We see institutions of global order like the World Health Organization being dismantled, frameworks of doing environmental protection around environmental accords, the Paris Agreement, and all other stuff being demolished. But to answer your point, what that means is then maybe the structures that were created, especially after the Second World War, may no longer be fit for purpose. And we've had, especially, and this is one thing that President Ruto has been really on the forefront about, we need to dismantle this world order and create another one that's more inclusive. 5 countries cannot decide for everybody and all the other stuff. So there's need to re-examine that. But number 2, we need to look at these issues internally. And we need to be honest brokers in the region. Because if there is conflict and violence in Sudan, South Sudan, the Congo and all this, as a country, we suffer. We should be looking for ways and means of expanding our collaboration through peace and development, diplomacy, and not through war and rent-seeking like what we're seeing now. So I think it behoves a new generation of leaders and thinkers to actually come together, and especially in this region, to reimagine a new world order, because I think the world order that was created after the Second World War is rapidly disintegrating.
And even as that, I mean, we're looking at file footage of what happened a couple of years ago, and I look at people in a situation whereby it quickly degenerated into something that then looked like criminality. But at the very beginning, it was people coming in and saying, you know what, these are things that affect our livelihood. These are things that affect the very pillars that the Constitution was guaranteed to protect. So a very difficult question might be, are we getting to the point whereby there has to be the realization that human rights, though guaranteed by constitutions then, would be things that would be seen as favors by government that they would then be able to apply. Because it doesn't look as though it's on the menu, that it would be the first things, regardless of what the Bill of Rights says. Should we come to that reality, that you're going to have to fight for your human rights?
I shudder to think what that reality will actually look like.
That's the reality.
Yeah,
That's the reality.
it is, but then now there is a semblance. Like I said, there's a semblance of we are governed by this. But once we throw this out, once we say this means nothing, then actually we will be regressing to a very terrible era, not only as Kenya, but globally.
But are we not already there? And I'm going to push on that a little bit, kind of like a dog with a bone, taking the proverb into consideration. The reality is what we are faced now, that day after day there's an abrogation of these rights. The Constitution, which is sacrosanct, is unfortunately not being followed. We talk about the spirit and the letter of the Constitution, neither of those are being paid attention to. So sometimes, in order for you to get to a better place, you have to embrace the worst, which is, and say, actually, this could actually be our reality. And do we want to continue to live there? And what do we have to do to ensure that that is not the reality?
That wasn't supposed to be the outcome, like you rightly say. So I think when people went out there, they didn't go out there with the intention of being shot at.
No.
They did not go out there with the intention of having goons.
And nobody said, I'm going out today to die.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I want us to put that in context. Because at the end of the day, I don't want us to lose sight of the very noble reason, like I said, why people go out there. They want economic freedom. They want political freedom. The leaders may not be facilitating that environment, but the people are not oblivious to that fact that they're entitled to certain guarantees. In this country, even before talk about human rights and all this is what we call human agency. That is what drove people to say, listen, this is our country, we want our freedom. So the people who fought for this country, the ones who are agitating for independence, may not have heard something called a Constitution of Kenya 2010, but inherently as human beings, they knew that freedom is an inalienable part of being a human being. The ability to actually lead your life the way you want to lead it, the ability to enjoy certain participation in the civic space. So, I'm very optimistic that and I've been saying this from spaces I was yesterday. I think if you look at this country and the phases we've come through, you will see that we've come through three phases. The first phase is the independence phase. Yes. We had young people there. We had Tom Mboya, I've been mentioning this. We had Tom Mboya was 23. We had Martin Shikuku who was 28 when he went to the Lancaster Constitutional Conference. We had Mwai Kibaki who was 32. We had others. We had great women during that time, like Field Marshal Modoni. We had Wamboyi Otieno. What was the promise of that generation? That generation came together to say, listen, the colonialists may be telling us that we don't deserve to be free, but we, the people at that time, want to be free. And the call of that generation was political independence, which they gave the country. Fast forward to 1993, 30 years, another generation emerged. And that's my generation. We were on the streets demanding for repeal Section 2A. We want more freedoms. We want the Constitution, a constitutional order that's homegrown, not the one that was given to us in Lancaster. And surely, the first phase made this country a little bit better. The second phase, with the repeal of Section 2A, the country became a bit better, so we're moving progressively from that, on that optimism trajectory. And then the third phase is what we're experiencing now. What we're experiencing now, again, another generation that has emerged after 30 years. What are the young people asking? And that's what I said when they went out there. They are asking for accountability. They don't want to see the grand larceny that has been that's being exposed by their leaders, the corruption. So they say, yes, we have a good constitution, we have all this policy and all this, but we have to leave it. So yes, it may look like it's all gloom and nothing is moving, but at the end of the day, this constant push moves the country a little bit forward in the right trajectory. So
George,
I remain ever optimistic that that's where we're moving.
I mean, even as we are optimistic on the same, right, we cannot run away from the fact that with the optimism that the Constitution brought into the country, There are those who are hell-bent to keep on doing things the way they've done, because you look at the political class, and the political class wants to do business as usual, yet it is not business as usual. Why do I say that? We said that the Constitution is clear. There are rights that Kenyans have been given in the Constitution. But even as late as early this morning, we see that Constitution has been put aside. Right to assemble, right to picket, right to movement have all been taken away from Kenyans this morning. Why? Because there is a political class that is not ready to live by the Constitution. And one then asks the question, is this Constitution a suggestion to the political class, but a reality to the millions of Kenyans? And if that's the difference we have, does it mean our political class is the problem as to why we see the issues we see today?
But who is the political class? The political class are a creation, like I said earlier on, of the Kenyan people. The Kenyan people are the ones who go out there and vote for these people. So I want us to always remain alive to the fact that politicians don't elect themselves. There could be cases whereby people talk about elections that are not free and fair, but at the end of the day, this political class has come into office by virtue of Kenya putting them there or electing them. But I agree with your point, and we've seen the tragedy in this country and most African countries is that once you've been given that office, then you take it like you've been given a title deed to the land that is called Kenya, or the land that's called Uganda, or the land that's called Tanzania, and you do as you wish. And then you weaponize the institutions, especially the security apparatus that are supposed to be the ones that are protecting the citizens. You align them to yourself, and in human rights we talk about the security apparatus then start serving the regime. So it becomes regime policing as opposed to democratic policing. And that is actually even borne out by the research that I mentioned earlier, because when it comes to the way the police and the state responds to the economic, political, and environmental freedoms, we see they are very keen on the political freedoms. So when people come actually out of their 1,000 protests, the biggest number of that were broken was really when people came out to express political freedoms. And the police came out with tear gas, they came out, that's the first thing that they used, and live bullets and all that. So again, we have a political class that once they get into office, shed all pretense of any service to the Kenyan people, and they start telling us things like, listen, I know what is good for you, and just give me time, and all the other stuff. But I think even as the political leaders want Kenyans to believe that they're leading them to development, like I said earlier on, I think in this country, most of our political leaders, constitutionally speaking, are really underdeveloped. They can't live up to the ethos of Chapter 6. And to your question again, we've had these leaders confess in the past that in these demonstrations, they're the ones who actually engineered the violence. They set vehicles ablaze, so that becomes a pretext for them to crack down on people. We've seen these leaders outsource their responsibility of policing when they walk alongside people armed with batons and all the other stuff. So they instrumentalize violence because they want to remain in political office and political power. So yes, when it comes to matters development, we may be having skyscrapers, highways and all this, but we need our leaders to also move a step further from the current level of underdevelopment, constitutionally speaking, so that they catch up with the skyscrapers, the highways and all that.
So we focus also on human development, so that ethos, as you rightly put it, can be subscribed to faithfully. But now, we keep unpacking this story. It is sad and painful because you talk about loss of life.
Absolutely.
But if you look at the research that has been conducted over time regarding war, regarding revolution, regarding uprising, what are the lessons perhaps that you would say we are learning? Because humans must continue to organize and exist. Governments, communities must continue to have some control over how the conduct of the humans will be in specific areas. Because I'm raising this concern because the First World War, the Second World War, all the conflict areas we're having across the globe, no one has ever won against the people. In Kenya, the first revolution against colonialism, the people won. The second liberation for political space, repealing section of 2A, calling for multipartyism, the people won. Yes, deaths happened. Loss of property was experienced and damaged, but the people won. Do you think this regime understands that there is no tightening of security controls that can win against the people? Not by the bullet, not by road barricading the roads, not limiting human movement, not punitive taxes. Nothing can stop the people from experiencing the liberties that they so desire. Do you think that lesson is being learned, especially here in Kenya? That there is no way this regime will win against the people, and therefore it is in their own interest, those who have the duty bearers, as you call them, to comply with the demands of the human beings called Kenyans. Because Kenyans are agitating for the rights within the very constitution that those duty bearers are suspending. Do you think we are learning that they can never win against the people?
Well, hopefully the lessons the leaders should take are exactly what you're saying, because some of us grew up in an environment whereby you were told the leaders everything, they know everything for you. And that facade became clear when people realized, no, the leader is not the epitome of knowledge and the fountain of knowledge and all the other stuff. We grew up being told to sing loyalty pledges to the leaders. I think now people should, those in power should know that, like you rightly say, at the end of the day, it is people, the people power that wins. And that's why we've been very clear in our constitution that we, the people, hold that sovereign power. And I think there's a lack of realization towards that. Let me give you an example why I'm saying this. You know, the current government, when it came to office, rose to power from a place of high promise and a lot of hope. It was actually, the campaign was based on, we're going to dismantle the old order, we are going to focus on the person at the bottom, we are going to raise everybody up. So the manifesto was very appealing. And if this government lived that manifesto and carried the people, because again, how do we treat a society's level of human rights compliance and development? It is by the way it treats its most vulnerable. So the message was spot on. We are going to focus on the most vulnerable, we bring them up, and we make sure that everybody comes up to par. And then there were other promises that were also made from a human rights perspective. Extrajudicial killings are going to be things of the past. In fact, the current regime said once they come into office, they'll form a commission of inquiry to investigate those deaths that had occurred in the previous regime. We were also told that no longer would we be required to communicate on WhatsApp. There'll be freedom of communication, freedom of expression, and all the other stuff. But I think once people get to power, somebody said sometimes that politicians campaign in poetry, then they govern in prose. So most of those promises that they made have not come to pass, but the people have jolted them. People told them, listen, you said you're bringing us from the bottom, you're bringing us up. You'll form an inquiry. The human rights community is still asking. There are those unresolved deaths, Rivayala, issues to do with the post-election violence, although the reparation framework has tried to address some of those issues. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you cannot bottle people's desire to live true to human rights, a people's desire to demand from their leaders, as it is required of them, to live in line with Chapter 6 that calls for integrity from these leaders. And at the end of the day, I fully agree with you that we, the people, will always have the final word. But
I mean, quickly, looking at what would be a last question here is that, do you need a certain level of nationalistic maturity to then be able to respect things like human rights? When we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we start with eat, sleep, shelter, and that. Self-actualization comes at the top. Would you say that there's a competition in terms of priority, that we're not going to look at that for the moment. Let's look at these other things. Once we develop them, we can start thinking about how you feel.
That is escapist. And actually for me, if you were to apply the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the biggest problem we have in this country is leaders who get into political office not for self-actualization, but they're still battling with the other things, the necessities and all this. So they go there to accumulate. They treat the state as if it was a personal enterprise to benefit from. So at the end of the day, if we were to subject these to Maslow's theory, that nationalistic fiber will come from a group of leaders. I hate to use this because it sounds a little bit elitist, but then the so-called talented 10th, who are going to be very committed to driving the country forward, so that the bigger people, the wider people occupying the bottom of the pyramid can then come up. Our leaders should be agonizing. How do we move our people from those basic needs to safety, to security, and all this? They shouldn't be fighting and scrambling with the people in that space, treating them as if they are enemy combatants and really trying to work on them. Yes, nationalistic, the biggest duty is on the leaders, because the leaders are supposed to have certain skills and competencies. And in a country that really believes so much in a divine providence, to whom much is given, much is expected. Our leaders have been given much by the citizens of this country. So nationalistic behavior and all this should start from them, in the way they plan, in the way they run the country, in the way they treat the citizens, and then that way they lift those ones at the bottom up
to the top. Well, thank you for joining us in this conversation today. Looks like it's going to be an interesting day regardless, but then reminding us of some of these things I think has been quite fundamental. George Morara, the Executive Director of Amnesty International, has been with us this morning. Thank you very much for doing so.
Thanks.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.